All right.
Just a second, please.
Sure. Yes.
Okay, 5 o'clock in Ireland.
Okay, so let's start. Quick look around the room. John Rapper is here. Luke Murphy is not, and I believe he's not coming. And Dave Visper is here. So we have two of the three. I am comfortable approving the minutes from the regular meeting. David?
Yeah, I had no objections.
Okay, so good with that. Acknowledge city administrator's late 2 minutes, I think. And what is it, the cumulative number of minutes you can be late over the course of a year, what is that again?
365, one per day.
Anyway, no public comment, I take it. And now, let's start with the review of special use permits for the Greek organization.
Excuse me, John, we're going to start with E, do a little bit of reverse.
Oh, yes, of course, we can do that.
Okay.
Deer Management Task Force, the reversal being listed here. All right, do you have any thoughts, Dave?
Sure. I just want to quickly read the part in the charter. It's Article 3C15, Section B, I believe. What it states is that the mayor may create and dissolve citizen advisory boards, commissions, and other ad hoc groups with council approval. And the mayor may appoint residents of the city to such boards and commissions with the approval of the common council, and the mayor may appoint residents of the city or non-residents to such ad hoc groups that may serve the interest of the city. It's my opinion, as the former chair of the Charter Commission, that it was the intent of the Charter Commission to have people approved on the boards, the commissions, and the ad hoc groups. But I think that's an argument for another day. But the piece that we do need to correct is the Deer Management Task Force was improperly vetted. And I could probably be safe to speak for the rest of the council that it was a little unnerving to finally hear that the Deer Task Force was not only formed, but they'd already been doing work, and I found about it in the paper.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't like finding out city business for the first time from the Daily Star. So I think what we should do is, I've got two motions here. And one was included appointing the people, but we have no idea who's on this if we decide to move forward at a bit later time with the ad hoc committee and appointing the people. But I've got a motion that says, motion that in accordance with section C15D of the City of Olean Charter, the Common Council authorizes the creation of the ad hoc committee to be known as the Deer Management Task Force. And I apologize, it's C15D as in Dave. It's not B. I was reading the mayor's email to me, which states B was the section.
Do we have anything, do we have that in print with this one?
The motion?
Yes, I'm just sure if we're referring to
I
anything.
know I've got a hard copy. Were you provided with a copy of it? Of the motion? Carrie provided it. Oh,
Good, thank you.
so there's two of them on there. They're not numbered, but the first one is the one that I suggest that we move forward to the full council for approval. And that way it codifies the Deer Management Task Force. And then like any other ad hoc committee, I would hope that we would get regular reports on what they're doing and what their job entails.
Tell me more about your perception of the Deer Management Task Force.
Well, back in February, I think it came from the Quality of Life Committee. We recommended to the mayor that some kind of task force be put together to first determine whether or not the perceived deer problem was a problem. And what other cities have done is an awful lot of work, and it's more work than a small committee can do. You're better off having that data piece be put together by an ad hoc committee. And we had asked about it, but it wasn't. I think the mayor contacted me again in June, asking if that was something that we still wanted, and I said yes. And then I didn't hear anything until I opened the paper last Wednesday. So, and they were asking people to fill out a survey online, and the survey is also going to be at, it was at the Grand Lewis last weekend, and the City Village Arts Festival coming up, and I believe it's got to be done and turned in by October 15th.
So what would you prefer to do?
Well, ideally, right now, since we want to pick our battles, the way the charter was written, I think it was an oversight, the way it's written. But the way it's written, it says that the mayor can appoint ad hoc committees, can form an ad hoc committee with council approval. But it doesn't say anything about needing approval to fill the ad hoc committee. It says that he or she needs the permission of the council, or approval of the council to appoint to such boards and commissions. But those are supposed to be, based on the section that it's in, those are citizen advisory boards and commissions, where I think we have a disagreement with the city attorney, who, I don't know if he agreed with me on that, but it's in the same section. Usually they refer to one another. But then it moves on to say may appoint residents of the city or non-residents to such ad hoc groups. But it doesn't say anything about the city, the common council. So as of right now, I think we should just approve, vote, if we're going to move the motion approving the formation of the Deer Management Task Force. And then if we want to have a discussion later about approving appointments to ad hoc committees, we can do that, but not today. I think we should do that as full council.
So, how do we proceed with that? Just make a motion?
Yeah, which I just did. So if we can agree that I would agree with it, then we're done, because we'll do that.
Yes, I'm fine with
And
that.
I can provide this to Greg, I'm assuming.
Carrie sent me the two motions.
Okay, the first one. Okay.
Good, I'm fine with that. That takes care of the Deer Management Task Force sufficiently?
Yep.
Okay. So should we move up to A then?
Yep.
Special use permits for the Greek organizations. I have read this proposal. It seems appropriate to me. Do you have any thoughts on what's been supplied so far for review?
Well, I know why we're doing it. The only part that I'm a little bit hesitant on is, I do like the fact that the Greek organizations need to come in front of the council for the discussion in a public hearing. But there's nothing the council can do to prevent said Greek organization from forming or from being given their permit, as long as they meet the standards of certificate of compliance. They weren't issued more than 3 noise ordinance violations in the last 12 months. They're not defined as a public nuisance. Property fails to comply with any requirement of 300-34. Which is the entire, right, thing. Or that they lost their institutional affiliation, which that makes sense. But I understand why we have to do it. I just don't really move forward with it. I think we're better off doing that, especially with where the big organizations are located in different sections of the city, different zones. So.
I found out, I'm looking at the number of comments you have been Steve. What are your thoughts on the comments that have been made today? Additions?
Oh, sorry.
So I provided the comments so you would see where things changed from one version to the next.
Okay.
So if you look at the comment section, like for example, originally we had that you couldn't have a fraternity located within 1,320 feet further than the institution, but we have fraternity houses kind of all over the city. And when we updated the MU1 code, everyone insisted that we allow for that use in the MU1 zone. So we couldn't really keep in our code that you had to be within a certain distance from campus because we now have a use that you could theoretically do in the MU1 zone that is further than 1,320 feet from campus.
As we move ahead, do we be prepared to present this to council for a vote at the next meeting, David?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would like this to move forward because we're waiting for this so that we can start the process with the fraternity houses. So if we can get this through, then we can just start and not have to have a weird break in the middle of the year.
So if we are referring this to have a copy to be given to the, presented to the council for approval, what do we need to do? Eliminate the copy that you're eliminating?
Yeah, so I provided a clean version, and I provided an edited version. So
Yeah, I didn't look at the edited, I really looked at the clean version.
so you can compare them.
Yeah.
So in the edited version, so we changed B. 334C, I removed the section about the parking requirements only because our code does not permit you to build additional parking at those locations. So what we'd effectively done is we'd said, okay, fraternities, you have to make all this parking, but we're not permitting you to make parking. So it didn't really make sense to keep a section about parking for a bunch of houses that have been there for 60 years. So we have a minimum floor space of like 6,000 square feet. No house that exists meets that. So by changing it to 3,000, it actually represents the houses that already are operating as fraternity houses. We had a section that had a 10,000 square foot lot requirement for these houses. Again, I mean, we allow you to build like a factory on less of a parcel size than that, so it seemed kind of arbitrary to put this giant parcel requirement on these houses. And again, these buildings already exist. They're not on 10,000 square foot lots. There's no point. We have an occupant load of 500 square feet per usable space per occupant. Again, the state fire code sets those rates. Basically, they set how many occupants you can have per square foot. This was kind of just a way, I think, to reduce the number of individuals that could live in the houses. The problem we have with that is we already have all these grandfathered houses that already have engineered reports that say how many occupants they can have. They're already operating that way anyway. So it just was kind of another arbitrary, pre-existing. And the other two comments were just pure replacing special permits with operating permits. Because under our code, the planning commission issues special use permits. There's no real mechanism for the council to issue a special use permit. So those were basically the big changes. We basically, I eliminated stuff that's kind of redundant because these are all pre-existing and there's no,
I feel like this makes it a little bit more of an objective process,
yes.
and it also gives our codes a little more teeth in regards to,
Yeah, I mean, so what we created here is, I mean, essentially, that section about things you can deny a permit for turns into the 12 items that are the maintenance items. Doesn't have certificate of compliance, has more than 3 noise violations, is a public nuisance, fails to comply with the maintenance and building standards found in the chapter. I mean, basically, you've got an entire section of actual things you can deny a permit for. Whereas before, we didn't really, there was no mechanism for that. We did an edit 2 years ago where we added some things to, but this one kind of, instead of the planning commission doing it, the common council will do it.
So, according to L, penalties, failure to obtain an operating permit, operation of a Greek organization, an administrative penalty shall be imposed upon the owner of the premises for every day said premises are operating as a fraternity, sorority, chapter, or membership association house without a required permit.
Right.
So, the other thing this does, John, is if, let's say you've got, the organization has issued multiple noise violations, they've not granted the permit, but they continue to operate as a Greek organization, maybe 10 guys still living there. So we can go after the owner of the premises.
So what it creates is, we have an administrative fee process that we already use on rental properties for non-compliance. And it just adds that same penalty process for not obtaining the special operating permit, or whatever you want to call it. So, if you fail to get an operating permit, but you continue to use the building, we would just tack on an administrative fee, and then at the end of the year, if you don't pay it, it's re-levied onto your taxes. And that's one mechanism we found that's been very effective in ensuring that most people are operating within the boundaries of the city's rental ordinance.
How many of our Greek organizations own their houses now?
Let me think off the top of my head. Maybe 2. It's not a lot. Most of them are rented.
Right.
Most of them are landlords that then rent to a fraternity. Because most of the, so 6971 Spruce is currently being managed by their national chapter. And off the top of my head, I think that might be one of the only ones that's managed by the actual nationals.
Okay.
But most of them are just rental properties.
I'm okay with moving this forward with full council.
As am I. Your thoughts are, this gives you the means you want to have from a zoning perspective to certainly control or influence the houses, the fraternity houses.
The concern that we had was that the council, these fraternities are spread out over the whole city. The planning commission is not really, I mean, they serve an important purpose, but they're not a legislative body, they're not representing the communities that these fraternities are in, they're just appointed individuals. So the idea behind this is that the council, who answers to the various constituents and the various wards where these fraternities are in, will be reviewing the permits and reviewing kind of the presentation that these guys do and girls do, instead of the planning commission. So you, like the council members, are more aware of what the fraternities and sororities are doing in their wards likely than the planning commission is. And they're hearing from constituents who are saying, yeah, they do all this community service, however, I've complained to my council person 47 times because they're also doing X, Y, and Z when they're not out doing community service. Or the council members who walk by, drive by, see the houses, might have a different idea of what these places look like versus people on the planning commission. So the idea is that this gives the elected official who answers to the constituent a much closer feel for how these organizations are being operated.
Yeah.
I'm fine with moving on to, thank you for your explanation.
No, I would agree, because you could end up having a planning commission where you've got every single member living in Ward 6 and Ward 1, where there's no Greek organizations whatsoever, so.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the idea.
But,
All right.
one more thing, do you plan on being with the council, when we discuss this?
Yes.
I think it might be.
Yes, so that'd be very helpful.
Would you
Yeah.
like this on the discussion agenda,
I think they should, yeah.
more discussion?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, because
Good idea.
we're trying to get this out, we try to get this to the students as quick as possible. So any changes we make to the ordinance, I want to be able to say, this is, because when we send out, I sent you all the application material that we send to these chapter houses. So when we send the packets, we include a copy of the ordinance so that everyone's aware of what the expectations are, what the process looks like, and if they have questions, they can contact me. So part of that application packet is the copy of the ordinance. So in the past, like 7 years ago in the past, we used to send these out in like March, and we tell them they have to be ready for a May meeting. Well, now we send these out in like September, so that we can say, you've had an entire year to get your SCP or your operating permit together. It's expected that you'll have it done.
Thanks. Anything else on this, Dave?
No?
Okay, we have a couple of other topics here. Issuances of special, we just on that, demolition of garages.
So I'm going to combine B and C together, kind of.
Okay.
I don't have an ordinance drafted in front of you.
Yes, I would.
One of the concerns the planning commission has, and I think is a legitimate concern, we currently require a site plan review or an unsafe declaration for someone to remove like a garage. I know why that ordinance was created, and I understand the background of that ordinance, but what we've done is we've created an environment where we're forcing people to wait a month and pay $150 to go in front of the planning commission to be told that a garage that was built in 1940 can be torn down. It's not effective in what it's trying to do, and there's no criteria for why you couldn't demolish a garage. So what it turns into is the planning commission looks at the site plan and says, sure, go ahead and bulldoze your garage, and we charge $150, and we hold up a project for a month, which arguably I would say there's much better ways to protect historic structures than making everybody who has a single car 1942 garage go in front of a public hearing to be told they can demolish a garage or demo a garage. So that's kind of where I was at on this particular item.
Well, right now, we currently don't have a better mechanism to protect historic homes, correct? But we're working on it.
It's ready. It's been put to, I think it's on next month's agenda, or will be.
We basically just split it up because of, we figured there'd be time constraint by trying to talk about too many things tonight, but, it's coming right up.
I mean, so my concern with the demolition, the current thing we have is most of the city is not a historic district, and most garages in the city are not theoretically a historic structure. So what we're doing is we're saying you have to go to site plan for review to demolish a garage. There's nothing in the code that says you can deny a permit to demolish a garage because it's historic. It just says it requires site plan review.
Right.
So if you were to deny a permit to demolish a garage, it would be entirely arbitrary because it would be the planning commission saying, we think this is a historic building and you can't demolish it. Versus an ordinance where we actually determine things that are historic and say you can't demolish it. So right now, there's no mechanism to deny the demolition of a garage. So we're just forcing people to go to these site plan reviews where the planning commission goes, okay, demolish your garage. And it seems to be,
It's just an administrative
It's an administ-
exercise at this point.
yeah. So I mean, I think there's two directions we can go. One is we tighten up the historic ordinance portion of it, which we're doing, to give legitimate or non-arbitrary requirements as to why you can't do a demolition. Or we rewrite our current code to include reasons why you can't do a demolition without site plan review. Because as it is now, it's just, you go to a meeting, you say, hey, I want to demolish my garage, the planning commission goes, oh, okay. So it's,
The legislation you're working on, will that help prevent demolition by neglect of a historic building?
yes, there's an entire section in that for that very purpose. I mean, so right now, like, we're getting buildings that arguably, like, so for example, my house has a garage. It is technically historic. It could be on the National Register because it is more than 50 years old.
I've seen the garage.
Exactly. So would I say that demolishing that garage is good? No, I don't think it is. If someone came to me and said, hey, I want to demolish this garage to build a new one, would I be like, absolutely not, this is a historically significant garage? No. I mean, it's a standard single-car garage. I mean, there's no... So we get into, like, when this was made, it was because of the demolition of a large historic carriage house that we wanted to protect, which is great if we had an ordinance specifically to protect large historic carriage houses. This mechanism is not that thing.
Gotcha.
So most of our reviews aren't large historic carriage houses. They're little dinky single-car garages that were built in 1955, 1938, 1970, whatever. And most of them have been neglected and they need to be torn down anyway.
Right.
So
This is going to streamline your process and save staff and work service time and
well, and the other important part of this is to work around site plan review. What people do is I've heard on the street, intentionally will damage the garage so they can go to Board of Public Service and they can get an emergency demolition order to tear the garage down anyway. So even there, we're not making any money. We're not collecting a fee, we're not doing a process, they're just being like, does it list more than this way? Is it missing siding? Is it, and they give a demolition approval at the Board of Public Service.
Do we gain anything by waiting on this until we have the other legislation in front of us?
We can wait. That's why there's nothing drafted right now. But this is something that came up as maybe a process that we could review, because currently it's either a loophole or it's just a administrative process that is not really doing anything.
I don't know how you feel, John, but I prefer, I mean, I'm glad you're on the motion tonight. I'm willing to go this route.
Sure.
Absolutely. I kind of want to have the other piece put in place first. Not that I think there's going to be suddenly this rush of everybody in town coming to want to knock down their garage. But I don't know, it would just make me feel better because I've kind of lived through that whole carriage house.
Yes. And I talked to Peter Friedman about this because I was like, why is this here? And I was given I read the minutes, I saw and I think that's good. I think there's a lot of mechanisms that are better suited for that specific purpose.
Just for me, what carriage house was that?
The one behind the sorority building on my board is now being sold for like 1 point something million.
Yeah, that's some interesting.
So it's kind of a shame. And just as an aside, it's not just carriage houses that are historic in town. We do have the occasional garage, I think, that was built significantly before. Like my neighbor, I'm pretty sure that garage was built maybe 1920s.
Yeah, so my garage was constructed in approximately the 20s or the 30s. I mean, it is eligible to be on the National Register.
Yeah.
My house and my garage would all be contributing. If I wanted, well, I do want to go there, right? I'm still. Anyway, so yeah, there are garages. Garages can definitely be on the National Register.
Yeah.
They're typically on as part of a larger property, appointment or designation. So, yeah, no, like car garages are a thing, they definitely are on the National Register. So it's not just carriage houses, it's not just barns, it's also garages, sheds, outbuildings, you name it. I mean, they can all go on there. And having an ordinance that specifically says properties that are designated as either nationally or locally significant, that's how you protect those buildings, not saying every garage is the same. By saying every garage is the same, you actually devalue the ones that are significant because everyone looks and says it's a garage. So by making everyone, you kind of actually devalue the ones that do actually get protected.
Do we need to proceed with another form of legislation or zoning that would,
Well, there's one on the table right now.
okay,
So like Dave said, we have a piece of legislation coming through to the next meeting that would kind of be that. And then I would like to see this kind of either be amended or just go the way of the buffalo, you know? Or, well, I guess they're kind of on resurgence, but you know what I mean.
What are you looking at? Okay, so are you planning on making the motion, writing the motion for the demo garages, possibly even for the next meeting, or do you want to wait? I mean, I think I would want to do these either together or the other one first, and then come back to the garage one.
Yeah, we can write it for the next meeting.
yeah, I think the concept is clear. And if we did anything permitting something to happen without a clarification of what shouldn't be happening, we're just creating a little window of opportunity we might regret.
So that kind of goes into, the demolition of garages kind of feeds into the other, which is the construction of garages, which was the other part of this that we talked about. Again, we're currently doing site plan review for single-family, one-car garages that are 200 square feet. We're doing site plan review for sheds that are, 10 by 12. I mean, a 10 by 12 shed has to go to, or not 10 by, a 20 by 10 shed has to go to site plan review.
Well, the only difference between having to go to site plan review for a demo versus having a site plan review for a building is the building may be a brand new structure where none had existed before.
Right, I agree with that. So what I would say is, we maybe should consider some sort of administrative process where we say, you can't exceed a certain impervious coverage, the accessory building has to be so far back from the property line, it can only be a certain height. Because what we're doing right again is, we're going to site plan review, but there's no real denial process. So you show up to your site plan review and you're like, I want to build a 10 by 20 garage, and the planning commission looks at it and says, it meets the setbacks, it doesn't exceed the impervious coverage, go for it. So essentially what they're doing is they're just reviewing it for zoning compliance and they're approving it because there's no real denial process. So what we end up doing, if you look at our planning commission meetings, most of our agendas are demolition of single car garage, replacement with new garage. Demolition of existing garage, replacement with accessory structure. So we're kind of in a weird world where we're doing these kind of redundant review processes and there's no real process to deny.
Are we going to be then theoretically replacing our planning commission? Or doing work for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would have our planning commission reviewing projects like the loss on deeds. They'd be reviewing projects that are scaled. I mean,
Well, it's also, I mean, that's fine, but in Indiana, there aren't many projects like that that actually happen.
right. So I mean, part of the planning commission's chart is doing like long-range planning, comprehensive plan updates. I mean, there's a huge there's a lot of stuff the planning commission currently is not doing, that they're tasked with doing in the code or in the charter. And I would just think that like where we're at right now is we have a process where people come into me and say, hey, I want to get a permit to replace my garage. And I say, sorry, you have to wait a month and it costs you $150. And they're like, why? Well, it needs planning commission review. But what are they reviewing it for? I don't know. I mean, there's no real... Someone demolishes a garage and replaces it exactly in kind, in the exact location of the exact size, still requires planning commission review. Well, nothing's changed. It's the same size, location.
Yeah, if you come up with objective
Right.
measures or criteria for approval or denial, then that can be handled administratively. There's no subjectivity to it, then
Yeah.
if it's black and white.
Right. Like the theory would be if we could provide a very streamlined, this is what we're looking to get out of this, then you have a process that we can say, this is what we're getting out of it. What we're getting out of it now is people getting really upset because they have to wait a month, pay $150 to have these guys tell them, sure, go ahead and do it, versus me looking at it and saying, sure, go ahead and do it. Because there's no real...
If it's the planning commission and ultimately the council that approves that criteria, they have their input, they're just making that process.
So like what we see is like, so South Bend, Indiana did a really interesting residential form-based code that provided like, this is exactly what we want these structures to look like, this is exactly what we want these parcels to look like, this is exactly what we want, so that theoretically when those applications come in, I can look at the whole sheet and go, yep, boom, meets it, boom, done. Instead of going, go to the planning commission can be like, well, how tall is it? 35 or 25 feet? Huh, okay. How big is it? Where is it? So it gets kind of weird, like there's no real, I don't see what we're getting out of the process right now.
Okay, so you're going to want to make that motion, bring it back to us. Do we want to talk about property subdivisions? Because that piece of it is similar. I'm looking at how much time we have, and we probably want to get through the next two.
Okay, so property subdivisions, yeah, I'll do the demolition, I'll do kind of that, we'll come back with the historic preservation part.
Okay.
The subdivision thing, again, we have a subdivision code that's like, if you subdivide a property, you need to provide streetlights and roads and parcels, and we don't have that type of, we're not seeing those subdivisions. We have no mechanism for like minor subdivisions, like small parcels that are less than 2 acres. So there's really we don't have like, it doesn't require site plan review, there's really no process in our code for doing small subdivisions. And that's typically what we're doing, our small subdivisions. So one of the things with the planning commission, or their recommendation, is that we come up with a better way to do subdivisions, or come up with an objective legislative process for subdivisions.
Yeah, the example I remember, John, was at a planning commission meeting, somebody came in and wanted to split the parking lot that they had for two
Yes.
different rental properties.
Right.
I think it was because they were looking to sell one of them,
Yes.
so. Okay, I guess I don't quite understand that issue. I understand with the garage, that's easy, the garage issue. I'm not fully grasping the property subdivisions.
So our current code has basically like a subdivision chapter that addresses like if you had a 10-acre suburban parcel that you wanted to break up in housing lots.
Okay.
We have in our code, we define what a minor subdivision is. It's like less than 3 parcels, but we have no process for how we do it. There's no administrative process. So the planning commission was like, do we want to address every property subdivision as that major subdivision where it requires planning commission review, and there's really no, because you're not installing streets, you're not installing water, you're not installing on like that parking lot subdivision. Lost on deeds is another example where we were like, well, how do we address what amounts to a small, because technically the Board of Public Service is supposed to review subdivisions as well. And you're like, do we need to do that level of review if we're selling, you know, a couple hundred square feet of parking lot? Like, what is the... So the planning commission wanted to basically let the legislative / council or make them aware of what they thought should be legislative change, or something to at least be drafted to address minor subdivisions.
Okay, so that's something you're looking to draft?
Yes.
Okay, I think maybe I'll have a better grasp of it when you've drafted something and we can have a discussion on it. I mean, how do you feel, John?
Yeah, I just would like to sort out what we're going to be reporting to the council, what we're doing now. So tell me what,
I would say it's just a discussion about minor subdivisions,
okay,
because that's what the planning commission requested be sent, that we had a discussion about that process and whether we wanted to make legislation to address it.
and what should be coming next.
Right. Well, next would be we would draft a piece of legislation.
And that will come back to this committee?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So demolition of garage is much the same. We're going to be getting some new information there.
Because in theory, that will go with that ordinance that will come next month that Greg already has.
Okay.
So that needs to be
1% public work fee.
That's not me. That's not me.
So, a little bit of history on it? Do you have any?
Well, I think I may have asked it on here for discussion because it came from the Arts Task Force, or the Arts Task Force, the Arts Commission. And I think that's with every major project that's done here, we would be putting on a 1% public art fee. I would like to bring in Councilman LaPierre Shue with us, since she's the liaison. Now, Katie, was this part of any project in the city? What street project?
Capital projects.
Any capital project?
Yep. And, I was coming to listen to the discussion, so I'm just quickly standing here to see if I have notes, because I did introduce this a while ago.
But was there a specific motion that was introduced? Or just the discussion?
Just the discussion to legislative, and it was tabled because we didn't have a plan yet, so. I'm just trying to see, I don't have any, I guess I don't have any of my stuff with me from way back then. But yeah, basically, 1% of any capital project would be added to the project costs paid by the developer. They can get, or I guess, I don't think it's part of the same legislation, but it's typically coupled with things where you can give concessions for things. So, like, if they include public art, we have a similar thing. I remember Stephen bringing this up with LEED certification. You can get like extra floors on your building. So, some communities do things like that. They're sort of developer concessions to make it more enticing. But basically, that would go into a fund for public art. I'm speaking in generalities here.
We can
Prepared.
We have a draft one that someone sent you, or maybe Jeremy, I can read from it.
It's certainly more valuable than what I have.
How long was it?
It's 4 pages, remember?
I feel like we're more in the discussion and understanding piece of it, and I've got questions about it. But sure, if you want to hit the high points.
It just says it's authorizes allocation of 1% of the capital cost to any any eligible town, city construction or renovation project for the creation and maintenance of public art.
Any eligible town?
Of any eligible town construction or renovation project. So probably you
Okay.
can tell us more about eligibility.
Gotcha.
Purpose of this bylaw is to direct integration of artwork into public spaces, etc. Definitions: construction project or projects, any capital project paid for in full or in part by the city through its own eligible funds or with eligible funds appropriated by other governmental units. To construct or remodel any building, decorative or commemorative structure, park, parking facility, or any portion thereof within the town limits. Eligible funds means a source of funding for construction projects from which arts are not excluded. Funding talks about authorizations for municipal construction projects budgeted in excess of $100,000 shall include and set aside designated public art fund, an amount equal to 1% of the total eligible estimated costs of such projects as determined by the town manager or his or her designee for public art. I think that's just it.
So for any capital project over, equal to or more than $100,000,
Yeah.
which most of our and this is done, well, I'm assuming it's legal, and where else has it been done in New York State?
I would bet you that Ithaca has a percent for art.
I think this is from Amherst.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Amherst, Buffalo, outside Buffalo.
New York City.
$1,000.
Where?
Be $1,000.
Wait, what do you mean?
That'd be your
1% of
1% of 100,000. Be $1,000.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I was saying you're doing the same thing, but on like $2 million level. I guess the only concern I would have is we don't have a lot of capital projects. Well, capital projects here could be a major street project. How would it impact people bidding on a project, though, if they know that automatically we're going to have a 1% fee tacked on? How would that work? Or how would it work in the bidding process on a capital project?
I think this is the city's committing itself to
Yeah.
funding. And so if our capital project to do whatever costs $100,000, we're going to
We would put
budget
$1,000.
$101,000, and that 1,000 is going to go to the
Be coming
funding.
from taxpayer funds.
I don't think this is,
Oh, because what Katie had said was that it was to be paid for by the developer.
That was my understanding.
So you could frame it that way. I mean, other municipalities do that. Like when we updated the zoning code, for the NU1, we specifically said, if you build a project like Lofts on Dietz, then you have to provide X number of street trees, and you have to do certain sidewalk improvements, and you have to do, which are essentially that. We're basically making a private developer do public upgrades as part of their project.
So, but this could be also both, where we have a private developer having to put money in, or, but what Greg was saying, it could be a capital project that we're doing, so then we would have to put money into it. Okay.
I think this one is the town's way of
Committing.
committing itself to funding public art, but yeah, we can do
But
it.
yeah, you could say all major, rehabilitation projects that exceed X, 50% of the building area are required to, provide X amount of.
Yeah.
You could do like permit fees, you could like do,
An additional permit fee on your,
or what I'm saying is you could say for if you put 1% of your overall project cost in, we can reduce your permit fee by X amount. So like you could do like a swapsies, basically.
yeah, so
Your
they're
permits-
going to be paying $30,000 in permit fees for this big project, they're still going to pay $30,000, but 1,000 of that, or whatever percent of that's going to go to public art instead of
Yep.
the general fund.
Yeah.
So Ithaca actually has a pretty comprehensive description of certain different funding mechanisms that are based on percent for art. So there's a public percent for art ordinance with voluntary private participation where there's a 1% designation for public art, but then a voluntary 0.3 or 0.5% on the developer side.
Volunteer.
Voluntary. There's an ordinance. It's like, sorry, I just like skimmed through it, so, and then there's per capita, which is, essentially what John was saying in terms of like spread across the taxpayers. I can send this to you. The funding, it's in Appendix G, it begins on page 43 of this. It's like 4 or 5 pages long with different options, and that may be things to, consider. And it has other examples of public art ordinances.
Greg, we have a motion already, a 4-page motion, so is that a 4-page motion, or was that a?
No, it's not a motion, it's an example of a bylaw from the common manners. I can share that as well. I think Jim Bowling might have shared that at one point.
I think you would see in our environment, I think you would see more participation if it was some sort of incentive than if it was, so if you incentivize it by saying for every 1% you commit to public art, we'll give you 2% off of a permit. Like, if you give it as an incentive, if you say, hey, this is important enough that we'll reduce the overall fee cost in exchange for, I think that's where you would see, so it would make it worth it.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I know you're looking up stuff, but you might want to hear this part. Oriana's had such a problem even allowing people to develop property or to develop things here. I wouldn't want to do anything that's going to make them immediately say, I'm not going to be part of this because it's going to cost me more. But I do agree, like what Stephen was just saying about giving them an incentive. I think
It's a lot easier to get stuck with a carrot than with a stick.
right. I like that idea. Because we're creating the environment where people want to participate in that versus immediately saying, well, you're going to get charged extra to do this. And I do like that idea.
I mean, I think it gets you to the same place.
It does. But
I mean, it costs us a small amount of revenue as far as like a permit, but, I mean, those are,
well, I think public art, we all know public art creates an atmosphere, and the atmosphere is part of what, many things, but one of the things that bring people to a place to live. And if we're looking to bring more people here, or create an environment where people want to stay here, I mean, that's a start, and it might be a small investment.
I mean, I'm thinking too, like, if you think about, so like Lost on Deeds, off the top of my head, their permit fee was approximately like $30,000, very large permit fee. So if we were to say like, if you commit $10,000, I'm just throwing a random number out,
Yeah.
we can reduce your permit fee by $12,000. Like if we incentivize it by saying, by committing to this project, this public art, we are giving you more money in return, basically. Like we're offsetting part of your permit cost.
But it would be for projects over a certain amount. Right, that would qualify.
Yeah, just like you kind of described.
Joe Schmo that's putting out a garage.
And we could, if we decided that we were that incentivized, if we were like, we love public art so much, we're willing to offer that deal to more people, then look.
I don't know that it would make much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. Like how many outbuildings and garages do we build a year in town?
I mean, most of our permits are for small jobs, under $100,000. Most permits.
Consideration, I think you want to do it for everything. You might as well maybe look at the total average number of permits and value of that, rather than figure out that amount. Being budget that for public art.
Do you think you could bring that data back to us next month.
Yeah.
Okay, John.
I think we need to have some specific, at least some ideas conceptually or more specific things that would show us how it works.
Yeah, and just shoot from the hip. I mean, basically what we see in most, a lot of uniform codes are using incentives like that, like inclusionary zoning for housing is either voluntary, like a lot of communities have like voluntary compliance, or they do like what we did with the LEED thing. If you build a certain number of affordable housing units, we let you build 2 extra floors. So this would be kind of the same as that, you know, by saying, we want public art, we're willing to give you something in exchange for it. That's kind of how most of these, most voluntary or that type of zoning or development code, that's what they're using. They're incentivizing it through permit fee reductions, additional floors, you know, waiving of parking requirements, like they're giving something in exchange for, and that's just kind of generic how that process works.
Should that, is it codified or is it looked at case by case?
No, it's codified. It's written into the development. So like in our zoning code for downtown, if you agree to do a LEED building, we say, great, you can build an extra story beyond what the zoning would allow. So the idea is that we're allowing you to build additional units, which will in theory offset the cost of LEED certification. Because that's what we want. We want greener, better buildings.
Well, I would suggest, my suggestion is if we could look at what Greg was looking at, if you could go that again to us, look through that. Stephen can bring back the data about the total number of permits, so we can look at it from, because I do like your idea about capital projects and doing it that way, but I like that idea too. Let's at least look at how many permits we get issued in a year and what that would potentially bring in. And because at some level, if we were able to do it where any project here, you can donate to art and then get a little bit back out of the permit, I think it gives a little more buy-in throughout the city toward public art as well. People will be more aware of it. But I'd like to see those numbers before we decide which direction we want to go. So,
Are you interested in looking at the capital project version of it as well? We just look at recent capital projects as examples and say this is what
Sure.
might have been generated over a 5-year period.
yeah, let's do that. If we're going to do it over 5 years, you're going to give us like number of capital, break it down by year also, so we know,
Yeah, that's right.
just
You can see
so we have that. Yeah, that would be really helpful. And we can make a comparison, and, I mean, this might sound stupid, but I don't want us to be also inundated with more money than we have places to put art, because that wouldn't, it would be a good problem, but it would be a little bit.
No, I think it has to be put into perspective of
Yeah.
what's a reasonable sort of thing from a variety of perspectives to generate the money.
Right.
It could be then devoted to public art, but then it's a question of how we work with
Yeah.
decisions about the public art in such a way that it's seen equitable
All right.
and effective. Okay.
I feel like we're making a little bit of progress on this. I think that's it, John.
That's it?